and harmful regulations that hamper economic growth and job creation, and we must start by putting an end to the misguided gainful employment regulation. I hope today's hearing will shed additional light on the serious ramifications of this regulation could have on students, employers, job creation, and the economy as a whole. I look forward to our witness testimony.
Because there's a hearing, we're going to defer to Cummings to give the opening.
Okay. I would now like to recognize Mr. Cummings from Maryland for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairlady. There is one principle we should all be able to agree on today. Our nation's young adults deserve the best education they can get, and scarce taxpayer dollars should be used to maximize their opportunities to ensure that they receive quality instruction and to prepare them to become successful members of our nation's workforce. This hearing should not be about protecting jobs at for-profit schools. It should be about creating millions of jobs for American students who are striving to better themselves and our society. Unfortunately, the record of for-profit schools raises significant concerns. Generally, students at for-profit schools are less likely to graduate, less likely to find a job, more likely to have higher debts, and more likely to default on those debts than students at public and private nonprofit schools. In addition, low-income and minority students, who make up a substantial part of the student body at for-profit schools, are 3 times more likely to borrow federal student loans, 4 times more likely to borrow private loans, and less than half as likely to graduate than the same groups of students at nonprofit schools. For this reason, nearly every major civil rights group in the country, including the NAACP, La Raza, LCCR, MALDEF, and others, have expressed serious concerns about this problem. Madam Chairlady, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter sent on February 3rd from 17 major civil rights and consumer protection groups relating to this issue, and a statement from Wade Henderson of the LCCR. Ask unanimous consent to have those placed into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to make clear that I fully support the educational mission for profit schools. I have attended numerous graduation ceremonies, actually spoke at Straier's graduation ceremony in Baltimore recently. I've met personally with their CEOs and presidents, and I've seen the gleaming faces of graduates holding diplomas in their hands. My concerns relate to whether U.S. taxpayers are fueling an incentive structure that encourages for-profit schools to use federal student loans to pay their CEOs exorbitant salaries, to pay their shareholders lucrative dividends, and to plow millions of dollars into recruitment and marketing campaigns, all while spending less on education and job placement programs that would actually help students fulfill their dreams. For example, the CEO of Strayer Education made more than $40 million last year, many times more than the highest paid president of private nonprofit university. And Strayer spent more than $100 million on marketing for admissions. In the 2008-09 school year, Strayer received 77% of its revenue from hard-paid federal dollars, taxpayer dollars. Despite these numbers, Strayer's 6-year graduation rate is just 14% compared to 55% for public schools and 65% for nonprofit schools. Strayer's loan repayment rate is 25% less than half that of a public and nonprofit schools. And I would venture to guess that there's no member of these subcommittees or committee, if you were running a firm, would stand for that, that kind of effectiveness. A bipartisan coalition of 10 state attorney generals have now launched an investigation into deceptive marketing practices and misrepresentations by for-profit schools. The Attorney General of Kentucky, Jack Conway, who is leading the probe, said, and I quote, "I want to make sure these institutions are as interested in educating their students as they are in collecting federal loan money. I want to make sure that students aren't being misled and left owing tens of thousands of dollars in student loans or credits that don't transfer or a degree that will not benefit them," end of quote. Consider the story of Yasmin Issa. a 24-year-old mother of twin 3-year-olds who recently divorced. In a written statement submitted to today's hearing, she described her experience at Sanford Brown Institute in White Plains, New York. She said this, and I quote, "The school's recruiters did not know much or give much detail about the program. It seemed like they were just trained to be very aggressive and sell the seat for the program, which would cost me a little over $32,000. They said I would not have a hard time finding a job and that career services at the school would be dedicated to helping me find a job. The recruiters kept calling me and told me that the seats for the program were filling fast and I needed to hurry up and sign up for the program," end of quote. After successfully completing the program, Ms. Issa tried for months to find a job. Only then did she discover that the program was not accredited and she was unable to become certified for her ultrasound degree. As she explained in her statement, and I quote, "I continued to search for a job. This time I visited a hospital in New Jersey. The supervising ultrasound tech informed me that if I had attended an accredited school, I would be able to sit for the registry exam immediately after graduation. This was the first time I found out that Sanford Brown Institute did not offer an accredited ultrasound program," end of quote. I ask unanimous consent to enter Ms. Issa's statement into the record, Madam Chairlady.
Without objection.
Our committee has the responsibility to determine whether taxpayer dollars are being spent effectively and efficiently or are being abused. If billions of dollars in student loans could be used to help increase graduation rates and employment placements after graduation, rather than enriching CEOs and corporate shareholders, our job is to examine the best ways to do just that. I commend the Department of Education for developing the Gainful Employment Rule in an open manner. And in addition to this comment period, the Department held 6 public hearings and hundreds of meetings with stockholders. With that, Madam Chair, I see my time has run out, and so therefore I yield back and would submit my statement.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. I now recognize Vice Chairman Anne Marie Burkle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Earlier this week, Americans across this great nation came together to celebrate Independence Day and the many opportunities that this great nation offers to its people. For generations, citizens of this country have strived to obtain the American dream. However, the persistence of this great recession and chronically high levels of unemployment have led many Americans to lose confidence in this dream. Just this morning, we learned that the unemployment rate actually rose to 9.2%. One of the contributors to the economic morass are the layers of the bureaucratic red tape and the onerous regulations that stifle entrepreneurial activity and suppress the private sector to create jobs. As part of the committee's commitment to promote job creation, today's hearing continues our ongoing examination of federal regulations. Regulations that are preventing millions of American businesses from creating jobs and putting Americans back to work, contrary to the American dream. Sometimes the testimony received by this committee is unsettling. Sometimes it's disturbing. For example, in February, a small business owner from Ohio was asked, "Would you do it all over again?" knowing what the regulatory environment is today in this country. His response was disturbing and it was heartbreaking. "No, sir, I would not." But he is not alone. Every hearing brings in more Americans who are frustrated, discouraged, and believe that the American government is actually working against them, foiling their success rather than supporting their efforts to help expand and expand the U.S. economy and create jobs. Today's hearing will explore an issue that we first learned about in February of 2011, the Department of Education's Gainful Employment Regulation. The regulation is targeted at for-profit institutions of higher learning, such as the University of Phoenix and Strayer University, to name just 2 well-known schools. These schools provide opportunities for Americans who may be the first in their families and to high-risk students, in other words, those whose previous collegiate experiences were interrupted by family responsibilities, military obligations, financial crisis, or perhaps some who are simply not ready to persevere as younger students. Additionally, many of their programs are designed to fit lifestyles of non-traditional students, like working moms or economically displaced individuals who seek to gain new skills so that they can pursue a second career. In addition to the opportunities that these institutions provide to many of our fellow Americans, there is some evidence that some bad actors have left some students with unaffordable debts and poor employment prospects. In response to these concerns, the Department of Education announced final gainful employment regulations on June 2, 2011. As the committee has reviewed this regulation, it has heard from many students, employers, and universities that it will hurt both reputable as well as problematic programs equally, eliminating post-secondary options for many students. As a general matter, institutions of higher learning offer important opportunities to Americans seeking to expand their skills and earn post-secondary degrees and certificates. The unemployment rate for Americans with a bachelor's degree or higher is 4.5% less, that's less, than half of the national rate of 9.2%. Of the 18 million undergraduate students in fall of 2009, 9%, or 1.62 million, attended for-profit institutions. For them, as will the other students obtaining a bachelor's degree, a proven way to combat unemployment and to obtain the American dream that so many Americans strive for. However, according to one study, the gainful employment rule will cause 1.2 to 2 million students to decline to enter post-secondary schooling over the next decade. This includes 700,000 to 1.3 million female students, 200,000 to 360,000 black students, and 200 to 333,000 Hispanic students. In addition to eliminating educational choice, Americans employed by for-profit institutions may be impacted if their employer is forced to eliminate programs or if it experiences shifts in enrollment. The uncertainty of how this regulation will affect for-profit schools may also affect new program development, investment in infrastructure, and worse yet, hiring. Concern for these regulations have been bipartisan. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi voted along with distinguished former chairman of this committee, Ed Towns, and a majority of members of the House to block the Obama administration from implementing the regulations. The administration, however, ignored the concerns and moved forward with finalizing the rules. Today we will hear from the most directly impacted by the gainful employment regulations, students, schools, and the business community who all rely on for-profit institutions for educational opportunities. The testimony we will hear today will help us examine how these regulations will impact job creation as we attempt to foster an economic recovery that puts Americans back to work. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Training, gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hinojosa, for his opening statement.
Madam Chair, I am going to request unanimous consent that Representatives Elsie Hastings, Maxine Waters, Ed Towns, and Danny Davis be permitted to participate in this hearing and ask questions of the witnesses. Also include Carolyn McCarthy.
We welcome our distinguished colleagues to the hearing today.
Thank you. Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Kucinich, and Chairwoman Fox. As Ranking Member of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Training, I strongly support the Department of Education's final rule on gainful employment for a number of reasons. First of all, as members of these two committees, we have a tremendous responsibility to exercise oversight and ensure that these taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and in the best interest of students and taxpayers. During my 15-year tenure in Congress, I fought vigorously to expand accessibility and affordability in higher education by working with my colleagues to increase